Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Commander's Forge. My name is Andy Bentley, and the Forge is an area for me to talk about Magic, Commander, and anything else that I need to try and get my mental health back on track. Not that it ever has been. Now, I do want to apologize for the last few weeks. I have been just extremely busy. I have not had the time or energy to sit down and kind of make coherent thoughts. Holidays are not stress-free times for, well, I'm guessing anybody. And I just didn't have the time. There was always something I had to do. And by the time I did get to a point where I could sit down, I was so exhausted. The thought of even recording was no bueno. Now, getting back on track going into this new year, I'm not entirely sure where I'm going to be taking the show. The normal format will be sticking around, but I don't know. I might be changing things up this year. Who knows? I don't really have the money to put towards it right now. The economy is just... well, it's just kicking my butt, honestly. I guess I just kind of want to round this out by saying I'm fine. I have been fine. And I'm surviving, for what that's worth. And this is, basically just me saying I'm not dead. So, yeah. Let's just get out of here, and when we come back, I will be talking about a deck, a version 2 of a deck. And I will be right back. Hey, I just want to take a minute to tell you about my Patreon. I know times are hard for everybody, and I know it isn't easy to shuffle around bills and stuff. Believe me, I know that. But if you would like to help support the podcast and me, you can find the links to my Patreon in my link tree, which is always put into the description of either the video or the audio, wherever you're listening to it. It would really mean the world to me. Honestly, I'm just struggling to make ends meet most weeks. But that's it. That's all. If you want to help, the links will be where you can find them. And welcome back. Now, for today, the deck tech I want to talk about real quick is the version 2 of my Ojer Axonil Deepest Might deck. So, starting off with the commander, it costs 2 red for a 4/4 god. It has trample. And then it says, if a red source you control would deal an amount of non-combat damage less than its power, you replace it with his power, and then if it would die, you return it to the battlefield transformed. It becomes Temple of Power. It's a land, taps for a red, and you can pay 2 and a red, tap it, transform it back into the god, but only if red sources you control dealt 4 or more non-combat damage this turn, and only as a sorcery. The first thing I kind of looked at when I built this the first time was redundancy for the commander. So I ended up putting in Torbran, Thane of Redfell, which is 1 red for a 2/4 Dwarf Noble. It says if a red source you control would deal damage to an opponent, or a permanent opponent controls, it deals that much damage plus 2 instead. And this covers their creatures, because the god himself does not necessarily care about dealing damage to creatures. And the other backup is Solifim Mayhem Dominus, 2 red for a 5/4 Phyrexian Horror. If a source you control would deal non-combat damage to an opponent or a permanent opponent controls, it deals double that damage to that player or permanent instead. And it has the ability to pay 1 and then 2 red for Phyrexian mana, discard 2 cards, put an indestructible counter on Solifim Mayhem Dominus. I decided to go with the god because, well, turbo burn, right? Solifim doubles. In many cases, Ojer Axonil quadruples. It turns 1 damage into 4 at his base. So, when I first built this, I kind of built it just kind of with the bare bones of what I had on hand. So the first section in this rebuild of the deck was trying to decide what direction I wanted to take it, because there was a thought to do like just a goblin deck and go ham doing stuff with that, but I settled somewhere between like a spellslinger and a pinger deck. So that kind of starts with the pingers that trigger off of, well, instants and sorceries, or non-creature spells. Like Erebor Flamesmith, which is 1 and a red for a 2/1 Dwarf Artificer. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, it deals 1 damage to each opponent. Sawblade Scamp is a single red mana for a 1/1 Phyrexian Beast. It has haste, and whenever you cast a non-creature spell, put an oil counter on the Scamp. You can tap it, remove an oil counter from it to deal 1 damage to each opponent. Electrostatic Field is 1 in a red for a 0/4 wall with Defender, and whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, it deals 1 damage to each opponent. Unruly Catapult is 2 in a red for a 0/4 construct with Defender. It taps to deal 1 damage to each opponent, and whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, untap the Catapult. And finally, Firebrand Archer, which is 1 in a red for a 2/1 human archer. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, it deals 1 damage to each opponent. So that's core is part of why we're running as many instants and sorceries as we are. But then there's some fairly synergistic sorceries I want to go over real quick. The first one being Hazardous Blast. It's 3 in red for a sorcery. It deals 1 damage to each creature your opponents control, and creatures your opponents control can't block this turn. Now, again, this itself isn't dealing damage to opponents, but when you're triggering multiple cards and then also able to turn off their blocks, it just plays into the way the deck wants to run. And the Festivities is similar, but it's a single red mana. It deals 1 damage to each opponent and each creature and planeswalker they control, and in this case, it does hit the opponents. Same with the next one, which is Tectonic Hazard. Single red sorcery, 1 damage to each opponent and each creature they control. And if we do get like a turn where we're just dropping a bunch of like 1-drop spells and dealing a bunch of damage, and then we just finish it off with a Grape Shot. It's 1 in a red for a sorcery, deals 1 damage to any target, Storm. So the main goal with a Grape Shot is, say, cast 3 spells while we have a couple of our pingers out that trigger off of spells. Each trigger with our commander out is 4 damage. And then each spell we cast that does any damage to them is also 4 damage. And then Grape Shot. Even if we only make 2 additional copies, that's 12 damage instead of 3, right? Yeah. So now, let's talk about some of the things that don't necessarily care about instants and sorceries that are in the deck. And we're going to start off with the wombo combo of Neheb the Eternal and Aggravated Assault. Neheb is 3 red for a 4/6 zombie Minotaur warrior. It has Afflict 3, which is whenever this creature becomes blocked, the defending player loses 3 life. The loss of life there being 3 would not get replaced because it's not damage. But at the beginning of your post-combat main phase, add red to your mana pool for each 1 life your opponents have lost this turn. Aggravated Assault, 3 mana enchantment for 3 red, untap all creatures you control. After this phase, there's an additional combat phase, followed by an additional main phase. Play this ability only anytime you could play a sorcery. So between the two, you just need to deal 5 damage in your first combat or before your first combat or whatever, so that Neheb will make you red mana that you can funnel into Aggravated Assault, which then allows you to attack again. Then you funnel even more mana into it. It's a way to end the game, and it's not like, yeah, it's a 2-card combo, but we're not tutoring for either side of it, and either side of it on its own is also fine. But moving on, we have a couple of things that don't really fit in with the creatures that just care about dealing damage. So let's start with Leyline of Lightning. 2 red for an enchantment. If it's in your opening hand, you may begin the game with it on the battlefield. But whenever you cast a spell, you may pay 1. If you do, Leyline of Lightning deals 1 damage to target player or planeswalker. It does only hit 1 player at a time, but you're going to be slinging around enough damage that I don't think it matters. And the other one that doesn't really fit into either of these things I'm talking about is Valakut the Molten Pinnacle. Land enters the battlefield tapped. Whenever a mountain enters the battlefield under your control, if you control at least 5 other mountains, you may have Valakut the Molten Pinnacle deal 3 damage to target creature or player. And it taps for a red. So it's a lightning bolt once you get enough mountains in play, right? And then if you have your commander out, it's a flame slash instead. So yeah. And then kind of the last section I want to talk about is the pingers that don't necessarily care about instants and sorceries. And this starts with Hellraiser. 2 red for a 3/3 devil with haste. Whenever creature you control attacks, Hellraiser deals 1 damage to the defending player. So again, you just go to town and hit them for a ton. I guess technically Sir Kara the Bold does kind of care about instants and sorceries, but regardless. 3 red for a 3/3 human knight. Whenever Sir Kara the Bold or an instant or sorcery spell you control deals damage to a player, exile the top card of your library. You may play that card this turn, and she taps to deal 1 damage to any target. So, well, technically I put her in this section because she doesn't trigger off of like instants and sorceries to do damage, but she does trigger for exile. You know what I mean. Moving on, we have Jessica Warrior Adept. 2 red for a 3/1 barbarian legend. I'm not sure what that's been errated to. With first strike and haste and tap, Jessica Warrior Adept deals 1 damage to target creature or player. Panicked Altosaur is 4 and a red for a 4/5 dinosaur with reach, and you can tap it to do 2 damage to each opponent. Gimli, the counter of kills, is 3 and a red for a 4/3 dwarf warrior with trample. Whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, Gimli, counter of kills, deals 1 damage to that creature's controller. And finally, the Mac Daddy of red decks everywhere, Inferno Titan. 4 red for a 6/6 giant with fire breathing. So for a red, he gets +1/+0 on the turn. But more importantly, whenever Inferno Titan enters the battlefield or attacks, it deals 3 damage, divided as you choose, among 1, 2, or 3 target creatures and or players. So, fun interaction here, because you can split up the damage. Say this enters the battlefield, and we point 1 damage at each opponent. Our commander then says, hey, you're targeting your opponents with non-combat damage. Make it 4. So we can turn that 3-point swing into a 12-point swing. It's stupid and wonderful, and yeah. Now, there are still ways that I could possibly upgrade this deck in the future. I'm just not really looking to spend a ton of money right now. And yeah, that's kind of it. I'm sorry I haven't been around, but I'm back. Back again. Alright, I think that's enough rambling for me. I will see you next time. Bye-bye. Thank you for listening. All of my links can be found in my link tree in the description below. I would like to thank Ian Foss and Cody Mulpey of the band The Crypt for allowing me to use music for my opening and ending, along with Nate and Erica Jacobs for making my original logo. And I would also like to thank Christina McNichol for creating my new logo. And I'll see you next time.